Well, hi there guys and gals. Here is my latest evolution of the Lidl glider RC conversion. I've made two of these before. The first one was a proper Lidl glider. My very detailed build blog for that glider, which has had 10,000 views now on YouTube, is linked below. The second was actually a Wish glider, which is much the same thing, but not quite such good quality polystyrene. And the third, just here, is my third evolution, which is a Wish glider, twin engine version. It's powered by 1000 milliamp 2S. It's got two CF2805s. I shall list all the components down below. Balances perfectly on the COG there with the LiPo here and the two motors, and all the electrics all fit nicely in here, and way back there is the receiver. So I've had to make quite a big hole in this to actually take all the electrics, but I'll show you that in the great build video that's coming up. So what do you need to build this? First off, power supply is a 1000 milliamp 2S LiPo, and as I've discovered with the twin motor configuration, you need a Y adapter and two speed controllers, one for each motor. You also need a Y adapter for the ailerons. I've linked an excellent video in comments below which tells you how to configure your transmitter to deal with twin motors. Now this is a pretty long video, but you can always look into comments below and there are time links which will jump you to any particular section that you're interested in. Anyhow, let's get on with making the ailerons. Mark it up. I've gone about the same size as the original ailerons that are marked on the wing. And then you need to make a shallow cut, which is going to make the hinge. Now you've got to be pretty fine with this so that you kind of go through far enough, but not right through. Although it's not desperately bad if you do go right through, because you can put some tape along that. Obviously you go right through here. It wants a double cut, so there's a bit of clearance. As I say, this doesn't cut as well as the proper Lidls, because it's fairly coarse polystyrene, but it's kind of okay. Now of course what you could do if you wanted to be clever was make a bit of a depth gauge there so that you don't go too deep, but in fact it works quite well if you just do this with it. Just very gently until it moves, like so. As you can see, it's moving. The next thing you have to do, of course, is cut a bevel along that edge 45 degrees so that it can have full range. Now to cut the bevel you do need a very sharp blade, and you try and do it without cutting your fingers off. I'm going to get a new Stanley blade out for this. Get it on a hard edge. You've got to come across carefully like so. And I needed to go a bit deeper here. Just do it and test. Well, the second one went much better than the first one because I found a more comfortable way to work. It's just a question of getting this to 45 degrees and then coming across horizontal very close to the hinge. In fact, it's much better and I can't see daylight through it. But still, as I say, I'm going to reinforce it with some tape anyway. Next step before sliding the wing in and fitting the motors is to glue a little carbon strut into the main spar. Bead of glue along here, that's just about where the COG is, about 50 mil. So I'm going to put a thin line of carbon along there, very quick bead of glue, and then push it in. So I'm not going to do that very easily on camera, otherwise I shall get in the way of the camera anyway. But hopefully I'll make sure the glue is really hot so that I've got plenty of time to manoeuvre that in and try not to burn my fingers. to which end, it's probably good to actually try and push it down with an implement or a blade. Right, so that's it, carbon in, no burnt fingers, and it definitely gives it a lot of stiffness there. Plus a bit of this nylon tape along the hinges. I feel much happier about that. They're pretty strong now. So next step is to slide this into the fuselage, and it starts to look like almost like an aircraft. Right, that looks better. Now it's probably worth measuring here to see if you've got it in the middle, or at least measuring from the tip of the nose to there to see if you've got it level. 18.5. Not quite actually, no, not quite. 18.25. And I also measured from the fuselage to the wingtip on both sides, which is the same. So ready for some hot glue now. You have to be quick with this because it melts this foam. It's such lightweight foam. If you linger too long, you burn a hole in it, as I've just done there. So having glued the spar into position, the next step is to hollow out a good chunk of the fuselage to take the electrics. And this is the tool I use. Bit of coat hanger wire. I've shaped it so that there's a wide end and there's a narrow end. Just heat it over the gas burner and scoop. Probably not a good idea to breathe the fumes, but does a great job and much tidier and cleaner because you can just scoop and shape as you want. But don't go too deep, otherwise you'll mess it up. So I'm going to do a bit more scooping and then I can mount the motors. Right, first off I'm going to cut a couple of small discs in 1/8 ply. And then hot glue them into position. Right, so whereabouts am I going to fit these motors? I think this position will be about right. Got enough clearance between there and the fuselage. I'll mark up the position, make a small cutout and then hot glue the discs into position. And the motors fit just with some small screws into the plywood. Well, this is a long steel rule. It looks like I've got them about right. Yeah, perfect. Try to get it right in this plane. Right, well my discs are 35mm diameter and I've measured carefully, so I'm going to make a slot in there. Here. That looks quite good to me. Yep, I think that's quite good. Actually I can adjust the angle of it. When I hot glue it you get a few seconds to manoeuvre, but I reckon that's going to be great. I'm going to put it in the middle of the cord so it's actually slightly high, so there's a bit more airflow over the top. Right, well in the end I've actually cut back out another chunk, but purely for aesthetics because I think it looks better with the motor set further inboard, like so. Right then, both glued in place, pretty much lined up okay. With the prop set back, that actually looks a bit better because the motor is actually slightly recessed. I reckon that's going to be good. Well, there you go, motors fitted. I think the line looks quite good to me, almost on the cord, just slightly above the cord. The wiring can come across underneath here into the fuselage that way, out of sight. And this is what it looks like with the props on. I think the 3-bladers look rather good. And the other thing I've done to give this a bit more strength and stiffness is add a little bit of carbon along here. I've not gone the whole length, but that's enough there to give it some stiffness. I mean, it's actually worked amazingly well. I just cut a slot with the blade, slid it in a couple of times before trying to glue it, and made very sure that I got these at the same angle of incidence, because if I'd have put a bend in this, as had happened with one of my other models, it really messed up the flying characteristics, as you can imagine. Next step is to fit some wing servos. So I've already made a start on this. I've marked the position. It fits in nicely that way up, and to make sure it didn't conflict with the carbon, I pushed a pin through here so that I knew exactly the limits of location of this, and that's worked pretty well. So I've already made a start, as I say. I've made a cut through here, but only partially through, which is why the tape's on there, to give me a depth gauge, because there is enough depth in the wing to actually put that in, and it'll be flush there and you won't see anything underneath. The easiest way I've found to remove the material is to melt it out with an old soldering iron, or you could just heat up a screwdriver over the gas. But be careful not to breathe the fumes. So let's see how this goes. That looks kind of okay. Let's see whether it's a fit. Not bad, needs a little bit out there, but with a bit of fiddling about you can make quite a nice cut out, and it actually strengthens it a bit because it's melting the polystyrene or fusing it together. Well, it's almost there, just needs a little more depth, but I'm going carefully because I'd rather not go all the way through. So I've just got to go a bit deeper, be back in a tick. Right, so that goes in nicely now, that's flush. The control arm will come up here, and obviously the bracket on there. Easy, that would be the next little thing to do. Well, the second one's a bit tidier than the first, but it's a nice flush fit. Just make sure there's enough clearance there for the servo arm to move back and forth. Well, that's it, they're about right. And I say about because I totally messed up with the measuring. Trying to measure and do it and keep it on camera, I actually measured one of them wrong, so I've had to completely butcher it so they're in exactly the same position. And at least I didn't go all the way through, so it's clean underneath. Tape on the top, you'll never see my mash up. And one last thing about the servos, before you glue these in, make sure you plug them into a servo tester, get them in a neutral position, because once they're glued in, it's actually very difficult to get the screws in and out, and that's what I'm going to do now. So here's my servo tester. This particular one has got 3 positions. I've laid these out the way they're going to be when they're installed. This way, there's a little push button here, but that's neutral. So if I press it again, you can see they're moving backwards and forth automatically. And if I press again, that's the manual position. So obviously when I actually install them, I shall trim it so that they're both in the same line. But I'm happy that they're in neutral, so I can put the screws in and glue those in position now. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to use my amazing tool here on the gas to scoop out a bit further into there. Now this is glued on, so that I can feed this wire through. Obviously I've got to feed the wire through before I glue it, and they come out just inside there. Nice and convenient for the receiver. And now I'm going to melt a hole through the wing to feed the servo wires through. So warm up a long old screwdriver, get the angle right and going across there. And as you can see, it's worked really well. I don't know whether you can see that. The servo wires are nicely hidden in the wing. You can see they just come out really nicely, and I've got massive space in there for a receiver and the LiPo and the speed controller. Right, well, my next step's going to be to cut a groove in this and cut a bevel to turn this into an elevator. We install it this way up. But before sliding it in, let's make the elevator. I'm going to go about 25, right. Now I say it makes it a bit awkward to cut it because of this, so I guess the best thing is probably to get it on an edge like this. And as before, you just want to go partially through. So I'm just going partially through, but you need to go fully through that bit because it's not going to hinge with a bend in it. Right, let's see how that looks. Come through there. Come through here. As before, I think the best way to get the depth of this is to actually take it apart like this, flex it, and then run it down while you're holding it, and then you can actually feel what's happening. Yeah, that might be enough. In fact, I've already gone through there, but I need to go right through here, which is why it's not working properly yet. In fact, what you've got to do here is cut another small bevel. But it's kind of beginning to flex, and it will definitely need some tape because it's a bit fragile. It's more or less there. Right, I'm going to trim that up a little bit, and then it's a question of cutting that 45-degree bevel again. But it's a question of getting it at this angle, 45 degrees, coming across carefully, like so. And then, as I say, I'm going to reinforce it with some tape. Right, well that's not bad. Moves okay. And as you can see, I've cut out quite a large chunk there, or most of it just fell out, but that should work. But before gluing it into place, just a couple more little jobs. Just trim that little bit off there, otherwise of course the elevator can't move properly. And likewise, before you've glued this in, much easier to make this cut here so that the elevator can move upwards. And I know vaguely where it's got to be now, so just take a line across from there to there, like so. So that does it. Just some hot glue now around these edges, and then I'll be ready to pretty much finish this off. Well, that's it. So it's ready to roll. All I need is to finish it. And it looks like a plane now. So I've glued the wing servos in now, which means I can now get on and connect the ailerons. Now I didn't fancy using these monster things because they'll look huge and out of place on here, as you can see. So I'm experimenting with cutting down a couple of servo arms, which I've got here. I've cut into the tape there, made a little orifice, and I'm going to push some hot glue in. Got to be careful not to come too far through this side, otherwise it'll impair the movement of the aileron, which is why I've cut it that shape so that it will go in that way. And I reckon that'll look neat and tidy, plus will still do the job. Let's see. I can't actually demonstrate the gluing in front of camera because it's going to be quite tricky, because basically I've got to melt the hole with glue and then absolutely precisely position it. But let's see how it goes. If it doesn't work, I can always cut it out. Well, I think that looks okay. It's certainly strong enough. It's not going to go anywhere, that's for sure. And it's certainly less obtrusive than one of these great monsters. I don't know if you can see that. And the only other ones I had were way too small, like this. So that should do the job, I reckon. And didn't cost me a thing, because when you buy a servo you end up with so many spare arms that I've got dozens of these kicking around. Just the job, quite tidy. And when you're sticking it into foam, because it's basically got insulation all around it, it takes ages to go off, so you've got plenty of time to manoeuvre it into position. Yeah, I think that's good. Right, so having taken the step of gluing in the servos, I went to the next step, which was connect up the servo arm to the aileron, and that went really nicely. I didn't make a video of that, but it's just a question of getting some connecting wire, bend it to the appropriate shapes with some small pliers, and then hook it up. And I've just discovered these little connector locker things, whatever they call them. I'll put it on the screen, I can't remember the name, which do make life much easier. Another thing I point out is obviously you make sure these servos are in neutral before you actually connect. But if you need to make any adjustments, if you put a little kink in it like so, you can adjust by bending a bit more or opening it up. Whereas if you make it the perfect length and you get it wrong, there's nothing much you can do. So that works fine. I'll just plug up my servo tester here to show you the throws. But I always enjoy this stage because once things start moving, it's even more like a plane. So let's plug it up, and this is where you need the wire adapter, because both servos connect into channel 1 on the receiver, or in this case the servo tester. Right, so it's in the manual position, and as you can see they move really nicely. Obviously the throws won't be anywhere near as much as that, but you adjust that when you set the model up by changing the throws in dual rates. But that's another step taken. Right, so with a bit of trimming of servo leads, chopping off a little bit and shortening them, cutting this hatch, making a hole bigger here, the receiver will fit nicely there, well away from the speed controllers. The battery can sit here, quite a bit of space now, and it also means I can fit the elevator servo, because it'll be quite okay down in the tail because it's balanced out nicely by this here. So that's all worked out now. I can actually get on and pretty much finish this now, I think. Right, well I biroed a position there for the servo, made a cut around with the blade, and I shall burn the rest out, and then it'll be a question of just connecting up the servo arm to the elevator and finding a way to route the wire as tidily as possible. And then this is actually pretty much finished. Well, it's in, looks quite tidy, it'll be easy enough to connect up. It's not quite deep enough to take it, and as you can see I brought the wire out there. It'll have to run along here and tuck it in somewhere underneath the wing. And in fact I didn't use a soldering iron on it, I just used a small screwdriver to make the cut out. It's actually easier than using a soldering iron. Right, I'll get it glued in and connect it up. You do need to extend the servo wire, and I've got some really fine wire there that came from a Ethernet cable, and I've also pushed a screwdriver through there so that it comes out just inside here. Convenient to go onto the receiver, which is just here, and I think that's going to be a great place to put the receiver. It's well away from the speed controller, and I can set these up in a good configuration on the wing from here. So if you look at this, one more little job to do, i.e. that actuator at the back, and it's ready to go. I'll link a great video that explains how you do a mix for two motors down below. That's where I found my information. Anyway, let's get on with it and finish connecting this elevator servo. You've probably seen videos of how you actually connect a servo arm to the bracket on an elevator or aileron. So I'm not going to go into detail and bend it in front of you, but it's a question of marking where you bend it. Use some pliers to put a bend in, and then I felt tip pen where that's going to go on that, and I use these little clips to hold it together. Really good bit of kit to use. The other thing that's important is deciding which holes you're going to use to connect so that you don't get too little or too much range of movement. Well, that's that done. Nice and easy job. So that's ailerons and elevator sorted. So apart from a bit of tidying up, that's ready to go. And with the battery sat about here, still room for adjustment, and the elevator servo in the tail, no need to add any weight on the nose because the COG is just about perfect, slightly nose heavy, on my carbon spar, which is on 50mm, which is about the COG. So I think that's worked out really well. All I've got to do is find a way to secure that little hatch in there, adjust the rates, and it'll be ready for a maiden. Well, here it is, finally finished and ready to fly. A couple of things I'd like to point out. I made a couple of little nacelles to go behind the motors, mostly because it looks pretty. It's just cardboard from a little takeaway box. If I'd have thought about it before I'd actually decided to do this, I'd have actually moved the servos inboard or outboard a little bit, but it still looks pretty good there. And on the underside, still need to figure what I'm going to do here. Probably put a bigger bit of tape over that, but that's a bit temporary. As you can see, motor wires go into the fuselage here. Elevator servo goes in here. Still need to quite finish that off. I might just put a strip of tape along there for decoration. As far as the elevator servo goes, somebody commented on one of my videos that you should never fit an elevator servo in the tail. Well, in fact, because the battery sits in here and you've got plenty of room to move it, it actually works very well with the elevator servo in the tail because the COG is just about perfect now. Look at that, you couldn't want for better. And you may have noticed my landing light on the front of this. I'm going to leave that for another video, but it's basically an ultra bright LED connected to just one cell of the LiPo via the balancing lead. But I'm not going to go into detail. I'll make another little video about that. But as I say, ready to fly. Rates are adjusted, receiver's properly installed now with the antenna in a diversity position, and I'm pretty pleased with it. Of course, whether it's going to fly well is another question. It was a bit of a difficult question to know just what line to put the motors on, but I'm kind of hoping that's going to be okay. Oh, and you may see here, all I've done here for the moment is put some tape over this little hatch where I hollowed it out to put the receiver in. But that's that. I'm sorry there's no maiden in this video, but we've had weeks and weeks of strong winds, gales, rain, pretty rubbish weather, so no maiden. That's something you're going to have to wait for. But thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and then you'll be notified when I do manage to maiden this. And if you're interested, this is my first little build video, which has got 10,000 odd views, and the Wish Glider build here. And if you've got time, check out my RC channel or my paragliding and paramotoring. keep you amused for a while. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Hopefully I'll catch you again soon.